So without further ado, Jesse, please come on up.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be here. It's the coveted final slot of the conference. My objective will be to try to keep everybody awake for at least half an hour, if not 45 minutes. So please bear with me. So to that end, we are going to have roving microphones. Patty is over there, and Paul is over there. I want to make this session as interactive as you want to make it. We're going to be going through a lot of information, a lot of data, and people often have questions about what it means. So do not hold your questions to the end. Please feel free to raise your hand. If I see you, then I'll try to get one of the microphone attendants over to you, but I'll wait for the microphone to get to you so that it can be heard by everybody and gets onto the live stream. So please do not hesitate to ask questions as we go. So there are some things that I'm not going to do in this hour that I have with you. We will not be doing push-ups or burpees. There will be no ice baths. I definitely will not be jumping from an airplane with a dog, though I'll tell you that if there is a dog on the planet who probably would enjoy that, it would be my dog. He would be into that. We won't be doing any of that, but what I want to do instead is try to get you to think differently about public trust and confidence in the courts. And I want to try to leave you with several takeaways that you can return home with and go back to work with and try to apply. Because for me, public trust and confidence in the courts is one of those expressions that we're now, sort of thrown around all the time. And I think, there's a danger that we just talk about it in these very vague and general terms. And it becomes sort of a bromide, and we don't want it to be that. It is essential to the work that everybody does. And so we need to really give it some careful thought about what it means, what direction is it headed, and what can we be doing to try to improve the public's trust and confidence in the state court system. So about 4 years ago at the National Center, we decided to begin an annual polling project, and that became what you see before you on the screen today, the State of the State Courts, an annual public opinion survey to try to better understand what people think and to figure out what intelligence we can glean from this survey to figure out how we can apply it in the work that we do. So I wish that we could say that, or I wish that I could say that these surveys are just me sort of sitting around at my computer thinking about cool questions that I would like to ask of the public. But we have a little more of a complicated process than that. What we do is we assemble an advisory committee of court community members every year who get together telephonically, and we have a conversation about what they think the hot issues are in the field and the things that they want to gather information on from the public at large. So up on the screen right now, you can see the 2017 Advisory Committee. On the far left is the Chief Judge of the DC Court of Appeals, Anna Blackburn-Rigsby, Catherine Dolan from Indiana, who is a public information officer at the Supreme Court there, Sally Haleva, who is the State Court Administrator in North Dakota, former NACM President and current Texas State Court Administrator David Slayton, and myself. And we get together and we talk about these things and we try and map out what we want to do with the survey, but we don't actually write the questions. We employ a professional research survey firm to do that work. So I'm going to throw a lot of data at you, and it's important to me that you feel like the information that you're going to see up here is credible. So I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking to you about how we do the work that we do and why we do it the way that we do it, and see if you have any questions about this before we proceed into looking at some of the actual findings. So this is an annual telephone survey of 1,000 registered voters across America. And over the last number of years, we have been conducting this survey, and every year we are finding that it's getting a little bit easier to reach people on cell phones. than it used to be. And so the composition of our sample is 1,000 people. It's about 65% landlines, and it's about 35% cell phones. And it used to be about 10 or 15% cell phones, so we're getting a lot more people that way. This is really a survey that is designed to give us a big picture look at people's opinions around the country. And I often get asked, do you have information from my state? Can I get the information from my state? Well, because we're only talking to 1,000 people across the country, that makes the sample size within each state really pretty small. So this is good for a big picture, kind of directional, which way is the wind blowing, but it's not going to be really useful to you down in your state, especially if you're in a smaller state, because we probably only have a couple of people from each state. The survey was conducted in 2017 at the very end of October through to the first day of November, and no zombies were surveyed for this survey. I was kind of surprised that this was done over Halloween, and the pollster said, actually, we don't call on Halloween because nobody answers the phone. They're out busy doing other things. Now, the most important line to me at the bottom is the MOE, and that stands for margin of error. Margin of error in this survey is 3.1 percentage points, 19 times out of 20. So what does that mean? Anybody want to hazard a guess as to how to explain that? I'll do it. It means that if you were to survey any 1,000 registered voters across America over these dates, that 19 times out of the 20 times you conducted that same set of survey questions, that the numbers that you're going to see in these slides would be within 3.1 percentage points of any of those surveys. This gives us a really high degree of confidence that the facts that we're going to put before you today are replicable and really accurate. And if you do a smaller sample size, you get a higher margin of error. 1,000 is actually quite a large sample size, and so we have a really quite a small margin of error. The other question that I get asked quite a bit is, why do you survey registered voters? And it's a bit of a complicated answer to that. There's different ways you can pull together these samples, but the reason that we focus on registered voters is because we want those members of society, those citizens who are at least somewhat engaged in the political process. And the reason for that is because we want this information to be useful to folks who work out in the court community, and they can take the survey and they can take it to their legislature, or they can take it to their county commission, and they can say, look, here's a survey about what's happening in the courts. This is the basis for what I'm coming to ask you about, and it was conducted of the people who are out there actually likely to vote. We do a screen in the survey to make sure that we are being demographically accurate, so it's about 51% female and 49% male. It's representative of political party, it's representative of geography. It's a very balanced survey sample of the country as a whole. So there we go, that's my methodology talk before we get going. Are there any questions or concerns about how the survey was done before I move along? Okay, we'll move forward into some of the findings. As I go through these findings, and all of these are in the materials, they're in the slides that are in the app, and so you can go back and reference them later on. But as I move through these, please again feel free to ask any questions you have, and if you can't see something, let me know what I can explain. So the key findings from our 2017 survey are up here, and there's 4 of them. The first is on sort of core public trust questions. And as you're going to see in these numbers, there's a lot of consistency on some of the basic public trust questions that we've been asking over the last several years. We ask questions about how people perceive judges as whether they're being in touch with the community or not. And you're going to see that this is a challenge for us with public trust, that a lot of people don't think that judges are in touch with their communities. Our survey group wanted to look at questions related to access to justice in rural America. There are some interesting findings here about people's perspectives on how you should access justice if you don't live near a courthouse. And then finally, towards the end of the survey, we asked some questions about how people feel about self-representation and about customer service in the courts. And here we really came back with some really remarkable findings that I think give us some instruction on what we can be doing in the courts on a day-to-day basis. Most people here probably know that the courts are perceived as being the most trusted branch of government. And that continues to be true through the findings in the most recent survey. Now, what you've got up here on the slide is a look at the 2017 number, which is showing up here in gold, and the 4-year average on exactly the same question in blue. And you can see that there's a great deal of symmetry over the last 4 years and this year's findings. There's a lot of consistency, and this kind of happens in survey work where perhaps in 1 year a number goes up and the next year a number goes down. But you can see that over the last number of years, there's a lot of consistency, especially for people's attitudes towards the state court system. There's a little bit of variation in people's perceptions of the state legislatures and their governors, a lot more consistency with respect to courts. So these numbers are, they're decent. I would not be thrilled if I was a state legislator or in the executive branch. The state court system is at the top, as it usually is, and that's a good sign. But these numbers really still aren't high enough. And over the last number of years, we have been tracking people's attitudes on a number of barometers, and we asked them questions about their perceptions of whether the courts are fair and impartial, whether courts provide good customer service, are they providing equal justice to everybody who comes before them, are they a good use of taxpayer money? And you can see again that the 2017 survey findings are very consistent with what we've been seeing over the last number of years. Not any big change there. And I guess that's good, except these numbers really aren't great. When you talk to our pollster, he looks at these and he comes back and he says, yeah, congratulations, you've got a majority of Americans who think you're doing a good job. But these are numbers that really should probably be in the 70, 80, 90% range. This is what you want the public to think. These are your core functions. This is what you were put here to do. These numbers are not high enough. So yesterday, I was watching, I'm a big Facebook user, and I was watching PBS Live on Facebook. You can, on Facebook, they can now do live streaming directly. So I happened to be on Facebook, and the PBS NewsHour came up, and there was an interview with Eric Garcetti, who is the mayor of Los Angeles. And they were talking to him about concerns that people have with the administration's new infrastructure plan. And Garcetti is a big proponent of spending more money on infrastructure. So I'm sitting there, and this is, mind you, this is on PBS. And I like PBS because typically it's thoughtful and reasonable. But on Facebook Live, when they're streaming things, people can react in real time, and they can add comments into things. And as an aside, the Florida Supreme Court has just started broadcasting their oral arguments on Facebook Live for the first time. So in this interview yesterday, I'm sitting there looking at this stream of comments that comes up from users. And this is a politician who's having an interview about what's going on in his city, what's going on in Washington. And here are a couple of the comments. I wrote these down. This is my cocktail napkin from the airplane. One comment, blah, blah, blah. Another comment, then why don't you do something? Question mark. Another comment, nothing ever changes. So I wrote those down because I was thinking about this conversation today, and I was thinking about how the level of cynicism is really extraordinarily high in the country. And it's our job to try to figure out how to assure public trust in the work that we do. And we're not right now in a very good place. So there is definitely work that we need to do. I'm going to move on in just a second to another slide, but before I do that, I want to do something kind of old school, and this is going to be the ask for the show of the hands. In this room, Who in this room believes that the judges in their courtrooms where you work make decisions based on the facts and the law of every individual case? Raise your hand if you believe that. I see a few hands down, but a good number of hands up. And that's certainly what I would expect from our community. We believe that the judges who are there are doing the job that they're supposed to be doing. That's not really the perception that most Americans have about what's happening in courtrooms. Voters are really concerned that politics is continuing to undermine how the court system operates. And we have a couple of questions on this survey that illustrate that. I know that's a little bit hard to read, so I'm going to read it to you. Which statement comes closer to your own view? Judges in the state court system are selected based on their qualifications and experience, or many judges are there because of personal connections or political influence rather than qualifications. So this is a pretty tough question to ask, right? And this is going to make a lot of this information could make some of us squirm in our seats, because these are tough questions. And as you can see from the results, that in the last 3 years, very little has changed on this front. We have a majority of Americans who believe that judges get to the bench not because they are the most qualified to be there, but because they have a political connection or some other political route that got them onto the court. And that's a disheartening place to be. Similar question, the question that I just asked you, which statement comes closer to your own view? Judges in state courts make decisions based on an objective view of the facts and the law, or judges in the state courts make decisions based more on their own beliefs and political pressure. While we do a little bit better on this question, we're not doing very well. And you can see again, very little has changed. So this is an important takeaway. There is a great deal of cynicism out there. People believe that judges are getting onto the bench for the wrong reasons, and they're not convinced necessarily that once those judges are on the bench, that they're they're making decisions based on the facts and the law. So we probably need to be doing some work on this front to try to convince people otherwise. Any questions on that? Okay. So you'll have to excuse all the glass half empty news, but I'm going to carry on this road. We asked, our advisory group wanted to look at the question of whether voters have a perception that judges are in touch with their community generally. And this line of questioning arose from a task force that the National Center has operating at the moment called the Community Engagement Project. And the idea here is that we need to be doing a better job of engaging members of the community in the work that the courts do. So on the survey, we wanted to find out how people feel. Are judges in touch or are they not in touch with community concerns? And this is a pretty disheartening result for us, because you can see that 60% of the surveyed respondents said that judges need to do a better job of getting out into the community and listening to people. And that's including 45% of respondents who said that they feel strongly this way. That's a really, really striking figure in polling, and the pollster made this point to me, which is you tend to see a lot of fragmentation, a lot of spread across these questions, but when you've got 45% of people say that they feel strongly about something, that's really a cause for concern. And this, again, this can make us uncomfortable because this is not necessarily what we are supposed to be doing. It's not necessarily our job to have community engagement, but it's hurting us in the eyes of the public. We're now at a place where we have become perhaps too insulated from everyday life, or at least people see things that way. And that's a bit of a challenge. We did a follow-up question on the survey because we wanted to get a little more of the intangibles on this. And we did something that's kind of unusual. We asked people to tell us specifically if they had the opportunity to talk to a judge outside of a courtroom setting, so not in the confines of a case, but if they met them out in the community, what would they want to tell the judge what does the judge need to know that's on their mind. And this was a bit of an effort to kind of measure barometrically what is on people's minds. So we had 1,000 responses to this question where people got a chance to give a sentence or two. We wrote them all down, and because I can't stand here, and you'll be glad to know I'm not going to read you 1,000 responses, we did a word cloud. And the image up on the screen right now represents the intensity of what kind of reaction we got when people gave us this feedback. So you can see some of the major words that come out of this. I did want to share a couple of the verbatim findings from the survey because I think they're really interesting. So here's an example of what one person told our pollster. They, judges, need to make decisions based on the law and not on their personal feelings. Quote, I assume they need to know the struggle of everyday life, making a living, and supporting your family. It is an individual or case-by-case situation that they need to learn about before they make an absolute ruling. So those are just a couple of examples of the sorts of things that we heard in the survey. And I think the takeaway from this is pretty clear, which is we need to find ways to get out into the community and talk to people more and listen more. And I want to make this distinction really clearly, because over the last 4 years of research in these surveys, we have sort of upset the conventional wisdom that to know the courts is to love us. For a year, I've been working in this field for nearly 20 years, and I've done myriad presentations at judicial meetings, bar association gatherings, and all I have heard for the last 20 years is, geez, if only people knew the work that we were doing, they would love us. But I can tell you that based upon the research that we've done, the more people know about what's going on in the courts, the less they like us. And they don't feel like they're being listened to. And so it's, we don't want to go out there with another civics education lesson, with another, let me tell you how great the courts are. We need to sort of move this around a little bit, move it 180 degrees, and figure out ways that judges and court leaders can be in roles where they are hearing and listening to concerns, not just talking at people about the institution. So that's a tough one. That doesn't come naturally to us at all. But if we're going to move the public trust numbers, I think it's something we're going to have to figure out how to do better. Any questions at this stage? I see Kevin's, Patty. Off your phone, please. Kevin Bowling.
Where are you?
Patty was on her phone. I will take no offense, Patty.
Jesse, just out of curiosity, as you look at these responses and you see the need to do this, and I think knowing that a lot of courts are just trying to keep their heads above water with the daily workload that's coming in, is it likely that the National Center is going to do something to put together some speaker packets or some best practices or some outlines of things that judges can pick up and take into the community to have those kind of, whether it's a town hall meeting or some kind of listening tour or whatever you think it should be?
Yeah, that's part of the intended outcome of the community engagement project that is in its final year this year. So the answer to the question is yes, there will be things, there will be deliverables that we can package up that will be available for people. I think it's going to look more like how-to tips rather than canned speeches. We've sort of seen that movie for years where if we just gave the right speech, then everybody would be happier. But that's not what's happening out there. So the products of this engagement task force will be sort of tips and tricks for ways that you can have town hall meetings or how you can do work in your community to be out there and to be heard. But thank you, that's a good question, and certainly you're right. It's hard to fathom doing this when so many folks are, like you say, out there just trying to get through every day. Any other questions on this one? I'll proceed along to the next topic. So our advisory panel was interested in the issue of access to justice in rural America. And this came specifically from our advisory committee member in North Dakota, who deals with this issue every day. Folks in the Dakotas can sometimes have to drive hundreds of miles to get to a courthouse. And she wanted to know how much concern there was out there. And I sort of thought this was a fascinating set of results because there is a great deal of concern across the country that this is an issue, not just in these remote communities. This is a really widely shared concern, and I think it's kind of rooted in the idea that access to justice is important for everybody, no matter who you are, no matter where you are. And so there is a palpable concern that if you are living a couple hundred miles from a courthouse, then you've got an issue and we need to figure out how to make it easier for you. So that's what this question here shows us. And you can see that the question as posed was a challenge facing many state court systems is how to provide court services to rural, remote, and underpopulated areas that are sometimes 100 miles or more away from the nearest courthouse. Do you view this as a major problem, a minor problem, or not a real problem in your state? And 73% of our respondents, nearly 3 out of 4 Americans, came back saying that this was either a minor or a major problem in their estimation, and only 22% saying this is not a problem at all. I was really surprised by how strong the numbers were on this one, and also really surprised that the intensity of this didn't come from the places that you might expect. So for instance, the Great Plains, Montana and the Dakotas, they actually weren't that concerned about the issue, which was amazing to me. But the people in the Southwest, Arizona, parts of Texas, New Mexico, that was a significant concern for them. And then perhaps not surprisingly, as you go down sort of towards the East Coast, people in the mid-Atlantic states didn't really see this as a major issue. So we then wanted to sort of pose to them some possibilities for how we might solve this problem, because you don't want to just put a problem out there, you want to find out what people think of the solutions. And they came back with kind of a mixed bag of possible responses. We gave them a pick list of, I think, 4 or 5 possibilities, and we asked them to pick which one they thought was the right answer. So 13% responded with what I'll describe as the status quo. People have to travel now, it's part of your life, it's part of what you have to do. Just keep on traveling to get to the courthouse if you need to, and we're not going to change anything. A similar 13% came back with what I would call at the other extreme, the most expensive and the most resource intensive answer, which was to build and staff more courthouses. So you've got 13% over here saying basically don't do anything. You've got 13% on the other side saying let's put up courthouses to make your lives easier. But most people fell into the middle. There is a strong sentiment that people should be able to handle a lot more of their problems online. And at this day and age, that's probably not a big surprise that we had 1 in 3 respondents saying we need to find ways to enable people to solve their business problems, their court problems on the internet. And then the most popular response at 36% was to kind of blend the idea of allowing people to travel if it's something urgent, or requiring people to travel if it's something urgent, or wait for a judge to come to them. And I know that the sort of the riding circuit, the traveling judge concept is still out there. It's not as popular as it used to be, but it still holds a fair amount of appeal for solving this problem for access to justice in rural America. Got a question from Renee. Who is closer, Patty or Paula's?
Did you give these as choices, or did you let people do like free text answers to this?
For this particular question, we did closed-ended, which means that we gave them the list of 4 and had them pick the one that they thought was the best option. Any other questions on this? I'm going to move along to the next topic, which has to do with perceptions of the court system and the justice system as being really very complicated still. There was a lot of interest in our advisory group this year at trying to better understand what courts can be doing to help those who are representing themselves do it more easily. And we thought one way to kind of get a read on this was to figure out, to ask a basic question about if people had a preference for either having a lawyer or for handling a case themselves. And here is what we found. So the question was this: despite the cost, because we know from previous work that the biggest objection people have to hiring a lawyer is the cost. Despite the cost, I would want to be represented by a lawyer anytime I was dealing with the court system. The overall average of our 1,000 responses was 63% agreeing with that statement. So that's close to 2 out of 3 Americans still saying that if they had to deal with the court system, they would want a lawyer on their side. We took that and we broke it down by age group, expecting to see some pretty predictable things. And the data actually does become predictable to a point. So for instance, for the people who agreed with this statement, if you are 65 and over, 71% of that group agreed with this statement, which you probably would expect. People who don't feel like they're going to be able to necessarily represent themselves in a courthouse or courtroom setting. And then it goes down, and so you've got the next demographic, the next age group down, 50 to 64, at 66%. The number keeps moving down. So now you get into the 30 to 49 group, and now you're down to about half, right? And so you're seeing this trend, which, if it follows all the way through, means that over time, as the population gets older, we're going to have more and more people who expect that they're going to be able to represent themselves in court. And we get to the millennial number, and this is the part that kind of blew my mind when we got here, because I was thinking, okay, the millennials, they're used to doing everything for themselves. They want to do it on the internet. They probably don't ever want to deal with a lawyer. Well, they were up there with their grandparents, almost. 2 out of 3 people under the age of 29 said that they would want to have a lawyer in court. And in doing some thinking about this, the only reason that I can come up with on this, knowing what we know about millennials, is that if you're 29 or under and something is taking you to court, it's probably not for a very good reason, right? It's probably something criminal or drugs or something that you don't want to have on your record for the rest of your life. And so you're going to do everything in your power to make sure that you've got the best possible representation. I was shocked when I saw this particular part of the results. Very, very interesting. So we'll have to see where things go over the next couple of years when we ask that question again. Yes, sir.
Was this a question that was asked in prior? Okay.
No.
I was going to say, so you can't see a trend yet.
But we're going to start asking this question every year.
Right.
It's so interesting. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with this particular question over time. So here we are in a situation where people look at the justice system, they look at the court system, and they think, really, it's too complex for me to navigate. And many of them also recognize that they can't afford a lawyer. So for a lot of folks, they are really sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place because they feel like they need a lawyer to have a fair shot, to be treated equally in court, but they can't necessarily afford one. And we know that gap is growing. So the next set of questions has to do with, what are those concerns rooted in? Why do you feel like you couldn't handle this yourself? What are the sort of concerns that you would have if you had to go into a courthouse or a courtroom? The question that we asked was, if you had an issue that needed to be resolved in the courts, which two of the following customer service concerns would you be most worried about? And we gave the respondents a list of 7 and asked them, might have been more than 7, I think we took the top 7, and asked them to pick out the two ones, the two of them that they would be most concerned about. And you can see that the two things that rise to the top are help with forms or procedures and the fear of encountering rude or intimidating staff. So what does that tell us? I mean, I think that actually it's disappointing that these are the things that people think they're going to encounter in a courthouse. But I guess from our perspective, maybe we should look at this glass half full and say, that's not so bad, because really, these are two things that are pretty easy for us to fix. I mean, I'd hope. We're not talking necessarily about multi-million-dollar technology projects. We're talking about how to improve forms, make forms more accessible, put them online, come up with plain language instructions for them, make them available in multiple languages, and dealing with counterstaff and making sure that the people who are on the front lines dealing with those who come into the courthouse are trained in customer service and treat everybody who comes before them with dignity and respect, which is the expectation that court users rightly have. So you can see the list of the other items that were on here, and it gives us some idea what to work on. But I think really looking at those top 2, we can put an awful lot of effort in trying to fix those 2 problems, and that's going to go a long way towards helping people out in the states feel like they're better able to interact with the court system, and that they are getting the sort of service that they expect. We're almost through here, so I want to see, we do have some questions. Yes, John.
Jesse, did you find any geographical differences on this question?
On this particular question, I don't know. My expectation would be no, but I'll be glad to go back and look and let you know if I see anything. Do you have a hypothesis?
Yes, but it will go unspoken.
Let it be said that John Grecian has a hypothesis and it will be going unspoken. All right. Anybody else with questions on this one? Okay. So what do we do to fix this? How do we make this situation better? And we then posed questions that gave people some options on how would customer service best be improved in the state court system, and gave them some options to consider and asked them to evaluate which of these they thought would be most beneficial. So these are the top 3. We had about 9 or 10 of these that came back, but look at these. All 3 of these solutions scored at 82% or greater. 4 out of 5 respondents or more believe that this would improve the court user's experience. So developing online services to file forms or to pay fees, reaching court staff online or by telephone, and as we've talked about already, developing forms that are plain language and more accessible to the people that need to use them. Pretty straightforward stuff. So we're nearing the end of my major points. I do want to wrap up by just suggesting that there are things that we can take from this survey and from this work that we can go home and try to apply. We don't do this survey work just because we think it's neat or cool. We do it because we want it to be of strategic value to the court community. We want it to hopefully help light fires under everybody who wants to do work in this field to improve access to justice. So let me give you a quick recap based on what we've been talking about so far and what I think some of those takeaways are. First off, I think that judges have a special responsibility to try to uphold trust in the work that they do. And they should be doing that through their actions inside and outside of the courtroom both. Inside the courtroom, judges can and must be procedurally fair. They should be explaining the basis for their decisions. If they're writing opinions, they should be writing out clear opinions that explain the basis for their decision. That doesn't happen enough. It needs to happen more often. They should be treating those who come before them equally, whether those are parties with lawyers or whether they're self-represented parties. Outside of the courtroom, judges have special obligations too. And they need to really think carefully about what they can be doing in the community to enhance public trust. A lot of our judges are judges who come out of an election system, and there are sort of special advantages, I think. If you are a judge and you are in an election system, you get to be out there more, you have a requirement to be out there more, but how you campaign is very important in upholding the integrity of judicial office and not going down the road that many judicial campaigns, unfortunately, have been going down in the last 10 or 20 years. So that's takeaway number one, I think, which is that the judges have special duty to uphold trust. Number two, we need to find ways to engage the community. We need to be listeners, not just talkers, and we need to look at strategies that allows for feedback to come back into the court system. Number three, we have to find ways to make life easier for self-represented litigants. This is evident from the questions that we see here about people feeling the system is too complex. We need to be doing work so that people feel like if they can't get a lawyer, or if they can't afford a lawyer, or if they don't want a lawyer, that they're still going to have an equal shot at justice. Number four, customer service. Again, very apparent from this question set and the responses that we got that customer service needs to be something that we put a high priority on, so that people feel like when they enter the courthouse, whether they're getting it all the way into a courtroom or whether simply at a clerk's window, that they're being met with kindness, with sympathy, understanding, and fairness. And then finally, I think that one of the things that we as a community need to spend more time doing, and I saw an awful lot of this at this conference, is putting the court user at the front of every decision. Whether it's an administrative decision, whether it's an IT decision, I think we haven't done a good enough job of thinking about how these decisions that we make every day impact the court user who's going to either access something online or come to the courthouse or have a trial. So we need to think strategically and constructively about what we can do to improve that situation. And I would encourage you all to do that. So that's all I've got for you on public trust and confidence. It's a very important issue. We all talk about it a lot. I hope that these survey results give you a little bit of food for thought, and that you can take some of this home and put some things into action back where you live and work every day. And at this point, I'll see if there are any more questions on the survey data or the recommendations. I know we're at the very end of the conference. I really appreciate everybody hanging in here as long as you have. This room is really much more full than I thought it would be at 3:45 on the final day. So with no further questions, then I will turn it back over to Vicki for final remarks.